and so forth. From 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer, 3 R. Here, what you are measuring is density. Density in terms of number of people per square kilometer of land or square mile. So that is here. So if you plot the density like I've done here for two hypothetical cities, okay, this is the density function for city 1, this is the density function for city 2, okay. So if you plot density as a function of distance from the city center, you basically have a slope, basically you have a curve whose slope is called as the density gradient, population density gradient, PDG. What you see here is that a population density gradient is used as an indicator of suburbanization of a city. Now, you know that Mysore center is the palace, but there are a lot of suburbs now. Vivekananda Nagar, Saraswatipuram, Shmipuram, Gokulam, because it's very expensive for everybody to stay in the center. You move away, right? That process is called suburbanization, and this is a very specific way in which you measure suburbanization of a city, and suburbanization is the process by which the population density gradient declines in absolute value. Okay? So, now B1 is 0.4, that is the PDG of city 1, and B2 is 0.8. So, which city is more suburbanized? 1 or 2? Correct. Correct. Any city that has a lower value of the density gradient is more suburbanized, is flatter, right? Los Angeles is flat, whereas Bangalore is more compact. Mysore is even more compact, okay? So, and compact cities are also smaller. Like for example, as your friend rightly said, 0.8 B2 has radius of only about 8 kilometers, whereas city 1, which is more suburbanized, has about 12 kilometers as the radius. Correct? So, this is one very good way of measuring suburbanization. This is called as B suburbanization, B for Bangalore. And there is also a general sense in which suburbanization is defined, and that is like this: holding metropolitan area population constant. Suburbanization is the process by which people move from the central city to the suburbs. Okay? So that is the general, that is this. Because it's possible for migrants also to come and settle here, right? Correct? But that is not called as suburbanization. Suburbanization refers only to the process when central city is suburbs. Okay? That happened with my family many years ago in Mysore. I'm from Mysore. But B suburbanization is a very specific way in which you define suburbanization, which is what? What is B suburbanization? It's a decline in the absolute value of the density gradient. Okay? But this is a very data intensive process. Data intensive process in the sense, what is population density? Can one of you tell me? What is population density? Ha. So getting this at the sub-city level is a very, very data intensive process, right? You want data on population, you want data on land area, you want data on their distances from the city center, and you want to know which place in the city you're identifying as a city center. So it's a very, very data intensive process. So, I want that was not merely a theoretical construct, and I have done this empirically for Bangalore. When I considered Sampangi Ramanagar containing Vidhana Saudha as a center of Bangalore, this was my estimate of density gradient. So I regressed, I did a regression of population density on distance from the city center. So this is what I got for 1991. This was a positive 0.1. So this means in Bangalore for 91, the population density function was upward sloping. Now, what happens in 2001? The estimate is minus 0.05. So now, in 2001, Bangalore has become like this, negative exponential and reduced in absolute value. So which means that Bangalore suburbanized, okay, during to 2001. And we did this again for 2011 data. And you find that the absolute value of the density gradient has increased, which means that Bangalore centralized somewhat during 2001 to 11, and this could be, because merging of the surrounding TMCs and CMCs into the BBMP, what is now called as the BBMP. So it's possible that some centralization happened. So this is all using Sampangi Ramanagar, the ward containing Vidhan Saudha as the center of Bangalore. Now, what happens when you consider other city centers? This is Ward 20 was the ward with the highest population density in 1991. This is a ward called Kempapura Agrahara. And this is the population density function, which is negative exponential. And in 2001, we again chose the ward with the highest population density, and that was Sadashiv Nagar. Sadashiv Nagar Ward 32, and that is the ward containing IIHS, Indian Institute of Human Settlements. So what do you guys find out? Even based on the new city center, 91 to 2001, what happened? Can you see? alla. What happens to the absolute value? It decreases, right? So which means suburbanization happened in Bangalore from 1991 to 2001, irrespective of what is chosen as city center. Okay, and in 2011, we chose Ward 135, Padarayanapuram, as the center of Bangalore, highest population density, and this is what we got, and the estimate, which is much higher than the estimate for 1991 or 2001, which basically means that Bangalore, what happened? Centralized, right? Suburbanized during this period, centralized during this period. Okay? Now, so this is how the curve that I showed you looks. This is 1991 Vidhan Saudha, and here you see that it kind of flattened, and the curve flattened in 2001. And here the peak happens here, and this is post the creation of the BBMP. There is a lot of centralization that happens. And if you see the peak of population density in 91, this was 11 kilometers from the CBD, from Vidhan Saudha, 11 kilometers. And in 2001, the peak of population density was 10 kilometers from the CBD, and in 2011, the peak of population density is only about 6 kilometers from the CBD. So, it's very good to know that people are moving closer and closer to the city center. See, one measure of how egalitarian a city is would be to know what is the percentage of population living within the first 10 kilometers of the CBD, and Indian cities rank very low based on that. In Bangkok, for example, this is about 60%, Seoul 60%. I think Shanghai, it's about 40%. In Mumbai, that's only city for which we have data, it's only about 12%. 12% of Mumbai's population lives within the first 10 kilometers of the CBD. And we know how real estate is expensive in Mumbai. Okay, that is one. Now, there's nothing in the slide. Illa, there was one more equation itto. Can you go full screen model? It may not be visible. Please see. Hinde, go up. Go up. ಇದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಇಲ್ಲ 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 ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ದೇರ್ ನಾ ನೋಡಿ ಹೋಗಿ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅದು ಇಲ್ಲ ಇಲ್ಲ ಐ ಆಮ್ ಪ್ರಿಟಿ ಶ್ಯೂರ್ ಐ ಥಿಂಕ್ ದಿಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಏಬಲ್ ಟು ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ದಟ್ ಕೈಂಡ್ ಈಕ್ವೇಷನ್ ಇತ್ತು ಸಮ್ ಇಂಟೆಗ್ರಲ್ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಆಯಿತು. So what I'm trying to say is that basically the estimation through a regression procedure of the density gradient is a very data intensive process. Very, very data intensive process, because as I said, you need to, Ivaga with GIS, all this is possible. But without GIS, in 2006 when I did this, it was really not an easy task at all, whatever I showed you for Bangalore. So, Edwin Mills, who is considered the father of urban economics, he devised what is called as the two-point gradient technique. ಇದು ಈ density gradient, it's based on all populations, all areas and distances to each of these points from the city center. ಈಗ ಅದು ಬಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ರೆ ತುಂಬ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಡೆಮಾನ್ಸ್ಟ್ರೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು. Because I taught this to my class 1 week ago. ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಕೊಡಿ ನಾನು ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡೆ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. So, see, it's showing on the phone, it's not showing here. So what Mills did was, he demonstrated based on just 4 points for every city. Population of the central city, radius of the central city, like what you have here, and population of the metropolitan area, radius of the metropolitan area. You can easily find out, calculate, estimate our density gradient B, right? So what he showed was that you have to basically integrate sum over the population, right, of the central city. So you basically, so basically nothing complicated here, but what we use is some basic geometric principles we use. A city is a circle, right? So the circumference is 2 pi r. Everybody knows that from your high school geometry. And your LC will be the integral from 0 to RC of this particular equation. So 2 pi r andre circumference, or the density function. And density function is given by this, which is substituted. So ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ರೆಷನ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಇದಕ್ಕೊಂದು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ರೆಷನ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. So you do the same thing for R also. So you have done this for the central city now, and you do the same thing for R also. Population of the metropolitan area, radius of the metropolitan area ತಗೊಂಡು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ, you take the ratio of LC to L, ಈ equation ಬರುತ್ತೆ. So that is nothing but okay. When you integrate the equation from 0 to RC and 0 to R, this is the equation you get. This is the equation you get. And it is a single equation, single unknown. And unknown is what? This is a single equation, single unknown. Unknown being our B, our friend B. B is the population density gradient. That will be calculated, not estimated, like in the previous example I showed you. Okay? So, Edwin Mills demonstrated through his two-point gradient technique that it is possible to calculate rather than estimate the gradient for every city based on only 4 data points, not all the data points that you need for estimation. Correct? Anybody has a question, ask. Because Gottalva, this basic of algebra, here one equation, one known, you can easily solve it. But the problem is, you cannot do it in Excel just like that. You need to put a solver equation. And you have to use it very sophisticated technique, saying that you produce the value of B that sets this equation equal to 0, right? And that will be our B. And you have to remember that the B arrived at through this calculation is not a closed form solution. It's not a closed form solution because there are multiple values of the density gradient B that can satisfy this equation. So, it is a nice equation for countries like ours where we don't have a lot of data for cities, but you have to remember that you don't have a confidence interval for the B here, and you don't have any statistical significance that you get when you estimate a regression like I showed you for Bangalore. Understood? Everybody gets this? So there are some advantages of the two-point approach, but there are also disadvantages. And the disadvantage is also that it's actually upward biased, because I've also done this two-point technique and estimation for the same city, and the two-point estimate is very high, and the estimated coefficient is quite low. Okay, so you have to balance the benefits and costs carefully. I think okay. So before we move on, I want to summarize the limitations of Indian urban data. As I've already said, you need to view with a bit of skepticism the kind of data you get from cities, because they are not always consistent or reliable. For example, if you want to know how much Mysore spent on providing water supply to its citizens in October during Dasara, the city will have 2-3 different kinds of accounts. Of India. So like this, cities will have many different balance sheets and accounts statements. So you need to be very careful which one you need to use for your understanding. That is one. The other thing is that you need to remember that, as I said, census is definitely one source for urban research, but that's not enough. You know, now we are all dependent on the census. Census 2021 is delayed indefinitely. And nothing can be more frustrating than this, right? And in the US, we have data called journey to work. For example, when you and I travel to work every day, like how much time we take, what mode we take, and what are the other conditions from origin to destination. Those things are not available for Indian cities. This is a very big problem. I'll tell you why. See, a city is supposed to generate, in India, see, urbanization is only 31% as of 2011, but urban areas contribute to more than 70% of the country's GDP, which means that only people in urban areas are very productive. We work a lot. Okay, so, however, our travel time to work determines our city's effective labor market. A city's travel time shows how efficient we are. See, as a city keeps getting larger, the travel time should remain the same, and transport should remain cheap, fast, and efficient for citizens to commute. City's nominal labor market is defined as all the jobs created in a city. But a city's effective labor market refers to the number of jobs created within a 30-minute commute. So, for example, if for me there are 100 jobs available within 30 minutes of commute of where I live, then the city's labor market is a lot larger. Actually, there is a lot of empirical evidence from other countries like Korea, the US and all, which shows that cities which have jobs which are accessible within a 30-minute commute are also the ones which are very productive. Because otherwise, at a personal level, it's a waste of time. I mean, I read and all that, right? It's a waste of time, and it also has implications for your health. You might get backache and you'll get frustrated, and you cannot spend a lot of time on the road, right? All that is okay. But even at the city level, it's very unproductive. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. So, given the fact that then there is a very positive correlation between the number of jobs accessible within a certain commute and the city's GDP, we need to maximize the city's effective labor market and minimize commute time. And we don't have any data on commute time at all for Indian cities. So that is a major problem. And however, there is a lot of data on cities in China. I've been to China like about 10 times, and each time I come back wondering how much data they have. Millions of observations, right? We don't have any city level data sets like that, city level. And I initiated what is called as the State of Cities in Karnataka. It started from Karnataka. It came out as an Oxford University Press book in 2012. And then we scaled this up to the State of India Cities, which was published again. And then we did the State of Mid-tier India Cities, like medium tier, Bhopal, Nagpur, Surat, Patna kind of cities. That also was published. Now, so what we need is that for understanding the contribution made by our cities much better, we need big data sets, right? Big data, household level, to understand the urban spatial growth. And my Fulbright fellowship at UCLA is based on this, suburbanization, urban spatial growth of India cities. And we have no data at all on social infrastructure of our cities. Health, post-COVID, now we all know how important healthcare is, infrastructure is, but we don't have any information on healthcare infrastructure. I mean, the town directory about which I talked has some information on healthcare, but again, that is only once in 10 years, and that is also not published regularly. So that's really a very big frustration. And migrants contribute a lot. And again, COVID taught us how important migrants are and what happens when they go back. Right? Very sad. And except the D3 tables, which I talked to you about, there's no other data on migrants. And the NSSO, the National Sample Survey, they have data, urban data, but they are not based on every city. If you want to do something based on NSS for Bangalore, only about 800 observations will be there, and that's not enough. For cities, okay. For urban versus rural, that is okay. But that's not okay for city level data. That's one thing I want to say. So, now we can move on. I think all this thing is messed up. Land use regulations, that was the title. Okay. So, what we'll do is that, as I said, I need to travel. So, by 12 o'clock we have to finish. We have half an hour more. So, I would like to say a little bit about land use regulations before we get to this table, because none of those things are visible here. What do you know about land use regulations in this country? Urban land use regulations? Anybody? Anybody? See, if you put an issue and say urban, that does not become an urban issue. But there are some issues which are genuinely urban. These are building height regulations in India cities. I will be speaking mostly about what is called as the floor area ratio. Are there any architects here? Illala? Ade, okay. Urban planning. So floor area ratio andre ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ಗೊತ್ತು ಇದು? Nobody knows what this is. So if there is a 500 square meter worth of built area on 100 square meter worth of plot area, the floor area ratio is 5, assuming 5 floors. If there is a 200 square meter worth of built area on 100 square meter worth of plot area square, FAR is 2, and so forth. So this is basically FAR. It's called as FAR in Karnataka. In many states it's called as FSI, floor space index. So one problem with Indian cities is that their floor area ratio is very, very low or restrictive, and that is why you don't find skyscrapers here like you find outside of India. Okay? So one impact of the strong socialist Nehruvian kind of controls, planning we had, was to ensure that cities limit their density, and all urban policy in India is reduced to the simple principle of reducing central city congestion. Okay? So, actually I had a lot more slides. So I'll just tell you, summarize, because I've written a series of papers on this and I don't need a slide for that. The floor area ratio in India now, maximum is actually now better, 7 in Hyderabad. Lot better now in Hyderabad. And whereas in Manhattan, it is about 19. In Singapore, it's 20. In Shanghai, it is 13. Seoul, it will be above 10. So, I'll tell you why. See. Huh? Correct. But this is the average. I'm saying average. Yes? You had any other thing to say?
Yeah, one more thing I wanted to add. Last discussion you told about the health.
What about health?
Recently, I saw one video about the medicines which use right now. Whatever medicines are available in the market, same way in the Prime Minister scheme, we are getting the reasonable price of the medicines. But I saw the video that the medicine which they are giving, that also it is not a good quality.
No, no. Yeah, but I'm talking about cities. I'm not talking about medicines. I mean, I don't know. My daughter is a doctor. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical doctor. So I can't comment on that. I'm just talking about cities. Urban economics is what we are talking about. So, going back to our standard urban model, I showed you the downward sloping curve, no? That's called as a standard urban model, in which the population density is highest in the city center, okay? So, what happens is that this is the curve you saw, right? What I want to say is that, what does this show? The population density is the highest at the city center, correct? That's what this shows, right? That is the standard urban model. Now, if you have high density, your FAR, your building height, should also allow that, right? Basically, if you have a high FAR, if you don't have a high FAR, because our Indian cities, we have this policy. We have this policy. That is, we want to reduce central city congestion. So, our central city FAR will be low. Saying that you don't want tall buildings in central city, we cannot pump water to the 25th floor, we cannot provide electricity to the 10th floor. And why? Even an elevator, if electricity is not there, it will not work, so you cannot have 20 floors, right? That's the problem. But economically, what will be the effects of having a low FAR throughout? This is the theoretical effect. See, this is the downward sloping house gradient, house price gradient or rent gradient or the building contour gradient in the absence of an FAR control. The FAR control, see, in a city, in the central part of the city, all employment is concentrated. Lot of population is concentrated there. So, your land is very, very expensive. When your land is expensive, what will you do? Basic economics. You will? No, you will build up. You will increase the capital land ratio, right? Because even in my house in Bangalore, I live in the southeastern part, 30-40 side. So we try to do everything vertically only in our place. right? That makes sense when you don't have a lot of land. But the FAR regulation should permit you to do that. In India, they don't. Our cities don't. Only in Mumbai.
Policy matters, ma'am.
Huh?
Again, it is policy matters here.
Right.
Because as you told, up to second and third floor it is possible in the Bangalore. Even in Mysore also same policy applies. After that you are not supposed to go ahead.
No, but why? I'm saying that.
But it's a policy here.
Okay, allow me to talk. So, what happens is that when you impose an FAR constraint, the city gets pushed out unnecessarily. Because you're saying that you cannot build tall here, you cannot build houses here, right? You cannot build houses beyond the second floor here. So, people who would have been on the third floor here, they will go here. People who are on the fourth floor here, they will go here. People who are on the fifth floor, they will come here. And the city unnecessarily expands and sprawls. It grows, exactly. I am a victim of this problem in Bangalore. 25 kilometers one way every day I commute. Okay, in a very much cited paper, I and Jan Bruckner, he is one of the internationally well-renowned urban economists. We wrote a paper in 2012. We found that for every 1 unit of FAR relaxation, there is a reduction by about 20% in the city area, which if you translate into commute cost, fuel, time cost, the city can get about 106 million rupees in terms of improvements, in terms of welfare gain, which can be used to fund infrastructure improvements for a city of 7.5 lakh, Indian city. Okay, so that is the story of the FAR. So I was telling you that FAR unnecessarily expands the city, a low FAR, right? That is what this table is showing you. So what do we expect is the effect of the FAR on the density gradient. Here the population density gradient is the dependent variable and FAR is one of the independent variables. So if the FAR is high, correct, the density gradient should be high or low for a city to be compact. If the FAR is high, the assumption is that the city will be compact, centralized, right? High FAR, compact city. So high density gradient, high value. So it's a positive effect that we expect. But what I found was the negative effect of the FAR on suburbanization, which basically reflects the fact that in Indian cities, FAR is allowed only in the periphery. The higher FAR is allowed only periphery, not in the center. We are now finishing a study for Karnataka Evaluation Authority, in which we find that FAR is not attainable in the center, and there is a lot of demand for high FAR in the center, which as per policy is not permissible. But in the periphery, there is no demand for FAR at all, but a high FAR is permissible. And this negative effect you find is because of that. Higher FAR in their suburbs, and people are going towards the suburbanization. That's what this basically shows. And none of the other variables are actually significant except the ratio of SC/ST and also the lagged value of the population gradient. This is the effect of land use regulations on employment suburbanization. In population suburbanization, we use the residential FAR, Whereas with respect to employment, we use the non-residential FAR permissible, and we found that it has no statistically significant effect on suburbanization. However, we found that jobs follow people. Jobs follow people because in cities which had a high proportion of population suburbanized, jobs were also suburbanized to a great extent. So we find that jobs basically follow people. So, as I said, the census PCA contains data on employment in various subsectors. So this shows the regression for manufacturing employment. What is the effect of FAR? There is no effect statistically significant of the FAR, but what we find is that the lagged value of the population gradient determines manufacturing employment, suburbanization, which basically means that manufacturing employment follows people for a lot of the skills that they have, right? So that is the reason why you find this effect. Here what we find is that communications, this was using 1991 census data. So in 1991 there was no differentiation for ICT. It was just communications employment, transport and communications it was called. So we used that, and interestingly we found that the ratio of literacy rate in the central city to that in the suburbs has a positive impact, which basically means that communications employment goes behind IT skills and talent, for which the literacy rate is just used as an indicator because in the census this data beyond literacy rate are not available. Okay, so I want to say one other thing. You all learned about suburbanization earlier in this class. There are two explanations of suburbanization. One is called as the natural evolution theory, which basically means that when a city grows, its income increases and transportation technology improves. Now see how the highway is between Mysore and Bangalore. What happens is that people tend to suburbanize because we know that in the center there is a premium for using land and its value is very high, right? So people like to consume more land and they move away to the suburbs. That is called as a natural evolution theory of suburbanization. Now there is another flight from blight antare. Flight from blight andre, whenever the conditions in the central city are not good, like for example pollution, traffic congestion, and a poor literacy rate, crime rate is high, taxes are high, then people would like to move away. That is called as flight from blight. So we also included variables in this regression to understand the strength of the natural evolution theory versus flight from blight. And this ratio of literacy rate seems to show that flight from blight also makes a very big contribution to our understanding of suburbanization, why people move away. So whenever the literacy rate is high, communication employment is centralized, and whenever literacy rate is low, communication employment seems to decentralize, right? So that's what this basically indicates. So this is again trade and commerce employment. Here we wanted to know how wages play a role in the suburbanization of trade and commerce employment, and this data shows that whenever worker emoluments as a proportion of output for the state is high, suburbanization happens. I mean, unfortunately, we could not get this at the city level, this data. And here, we also find support for the natural evolution theory of suburbanization, because population has a negative effect. That means what? One of you tell me. Population has a negative effect andre? No. That's not what it indicates. Yeah, so what is the effect on suburbanization? Correct. Not slum. This has got nothing to do with slum. No. This just shows population has a negative effect on suburbanization. What it means? Larger cities are more suburbanized than smaller cities. For example, Bangalore is a lot more suburbanized than Mysore. Mumbai is a lot more suburbanized than Bangalore. And Los Angeles is a lot more suburbanized than any of these cities, right? That's what it means. Simple. Larger cities are more suburbanized because of the desire to consume more land at the suburbs, and central city values are very high. That's it. Yeah, and I don't know, I mean, you're all teachers, so you would know what the Charles Taibu theory of voting with the feet basically implies. Anybody can tell me about it? Charles Taibu's theory of local governments, basically 1956 Journal of Political Economy, basically showed that people will vote with their feet. They won't go and vote in the ballot boxes like we do, but they vote with the feet in the sense that they will move to the jurisdiction that offers them the best package of public services and taxes. ಈಗ ಕೆಲವು ಜಾಗಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸಸ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಬಟ್ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಸರ್ವಿಸಸ್ ರೋಡ್ಸು ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಕೂಡ ತುಂಬ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿರ್ಬೋದು. ಕೆಲವು ಕಡೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸಸ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ವೆರಿ ಲೋ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗೋಣ ಅಂದರೆ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಸರ್ವಿಸಸ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ವೆರಿ ಪುವರ್. ಸೊ ಸಿಟಿಸನ್ಸ್ ವಿಲ್ ಚೂಸ್ ವಾಟ್ ಎವರ್ ಕಾಂಬಿನೇಷನ್ ದೇ ಬೆಸ್ಟ್ ಅಪ್ರಿಷಿಯೇಟ್, ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಸೊ ದಿಲ್ ಮೂವ್. ಸೊ ಇದರಿಂದ ನಂಬರ್ ಆಫ್ ಲೋಕಲ್ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗಿದ್ರೆ ಯು ವಿಲ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ ದಟ್ ದ ಕಾಂಪಿಟೇಷನ್ ಇನ್ ದ provision of public services also will be high. That is the reason why we included the number of local governments here, to understand their effect on suburbanization, and we assume that the greater the number of local governments in the metropolitan area, higher will be the extent of suburbanization. But we found a positive effect, disappointingly, but this was largely because of the dominant primary central cities we have. ಇವಾಗ ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಬ್ಯಾಂಗ್ಳೂರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಇವಾಗ ದಾಸರಹಳ್ಳಿ, ಬೊಮ್ಮನಹಳ್ಳಿ ಅದೆಲ್ಲ ಇದೆ. ಬಟ್ BBMP is a dominant provider of public services. Similarly in Kolkata, Howrah ಇದೆ, Chandanagore ಇದೆ. There are a lot of local governments there. But Kolkata Corporation is the primary provider of services. So it's because of the dominance of the primary central city that we find that we have a positive effect on suburbanization, which basically means that higher the number of central governments, higher is the extent of centralization, because greater is the dominance of the primary central city. That's it. So I think we have about 8 minutes. Yeah.